So I've cut out the rough shape of the neck using the bandsaw. So the next step is to use this template, and we're going to use masking tape and super glue to put that on, and then using the router we will just route around the edge. Put some masking tape on each face of the face of the neck and the face of the template, and I'll just put a little bit of super glue on here, and then carefully make sure that the template is in the right place. Make sure that the center lines match up. Okay, we want to make sure that the truss rod, which is in the center of the wood, remains in the center of the neck once I've routed this out. So I use these template bits. I have to use several of them. So they look like this, and they have a little collet there, and the collet, this is going to be this way up in the router table, but the collet is going to follow the template, and it will just gradually nibble away at the maple. So if I tried to use the longest of these in one go, I could probably just about cut the whole thing in one go, but it will chip out and cause problems. So if I do it with smaller ones, gradually going up bigger and bigger, then it causes less damage. So we made the basic outline of the neck yesterday, cut out the basic shape and then routed it to a template, and we cut out the channel for the truss rod. So what I'm going to do now, before putting on the fretboard, is to just inlay the truss rod, and it just drops in. It's a nice snug fit. And I'll just put in a little bit of sealant. It's just to make sure that it can't rattle. It shouldn't rattle anyway, not if it's under some tension. And for the most part, truss rod will always be under tension, but just in case. And I need to get rid of any excess on the wood. So that when I come to glue the fretboard on, I'm not trying to glue it to the sealant. I need to be gluing it to the wood. And when that's cured a little bit, I will just go over that with a card scraper to make sure that there isn't any silicone on the wood itself. So the next stage is to put on the fretboard. So I've decided to use this maple fretboard, which I made a little while ago. And it's got some flame in it. You can't really see the flame at the moment until this has been stained or maybe had some sort of finish put on it. But there is a little bit of flame in there, and I think it'll look quite nice. So in order to get this on and to make sure it doesn't move whilst it's being glued, I'm going to put some nails into the neck here and at the around about the 22nd fret, maybe the 20th fret, and then just leave those protruding slightly. Put the fretboard on top, press it down to make some indentations, drill some tiny holes, and then this will stay in place, and the holes will be drilled from the back so that you can't see the nails underneath. So I need to make sure that I put nails in a place that is not going to interfere with either the insertion of the frets or anything else, certainly not the truss rod. So I'm going to put one nail in between the, well, just before the first fret, put one in here, and then one down at the other end on the opposite side. So we've just marked a little couple of crosses. We'll take a small tack, a panel pin, doesn't need to go in very far, just needs to go in enough for it to hold, and then we'll just clip off the end. I don't want it to stick up too much that it would go through the fretboard. Then we put another one in down this end. So we just have the two pins sticking up, one at each end, and then I have a center line on the fretboard, and I need to make sure that that is in alignment with the center line on the neck at either end. And at the top end, let me turn it around, the top end needs to be aligned with where the nut is going to be. So now we have two small holes on the underside of the fretboard, and I will just drill those slightly, and then we now have a way of making sure that the fretboard doesn't move when we glue it up. So I've just drilled these holes at either end of the fretboard a little bit deeper to make sure that the nails don't stop the fretboard sitting nicely on the net blank. Now, the net blanks that I use come very well finished, so I usually don't have to do very much to the top surface to make sure it's flat. What I do though is I just go over it with a card scraper just to make sure that it's absolutely flat, and the same with the back of the fretboard. This will fit down, if I can find the indexing holes. That will now fit down, and even without glue you can see there's a really good fit, no gaps underneath. Now, one of the things that I didn't do when I was preparing this fretboard was I didn't do it in a Fender style. So the Fender style, this is a commercially made one. The Fender style has a small nut that fits into a slot, and the fretboard comes pre-prepared like that. So I didn't do that, but what I have got is a piece of wood from the other end of the fretboard, which I'm going to glue just up here. The grain matches really nicely. This will allow me to cut a slot for the neck, but also allow me to produce that nice rounded swoop effect that you can see as the fretboard goes into the headstock. So the silicone that I put over the truss rod has now cured, not completely but mostly, and I've cleaned the top surface, the surface that I'm going to glue to make sure that there's no sign of silicone on the wood itself. The back of the fretboard is also clean, and we have our two locating holes which will go onto the indexing pins. Actually, before we put the glue on, I'll just put some masking tape over the truss rod. I'll take this off shortly. But it's just to make sure that we don't have glue going into the truss rod cutout itself. Because that might interfere with its action. Being a bit generous with the glue. It's better to have a bit too much rather than not enough. I'll just make sure it's nice and evenly spread. So the indexing holes will make it nice and easy for us to make sure that we get the fretboard in the right place. If I can find them. And And then I have this other little piece which I'm going to put up here, and just so that it doesn't move, because there's nothing to locate this, although it's going to be glued with Titebond, standard wood glue, I'll just put a little bit of super glue on this joint, just so that I can make sure that it's in the right place, so that the grain of the wood matches nicely, and the super glue will stop it moving when I start clamping. So for clamping I use these radius blocks. I've got one at 12 inches and one at 10 inches. The fretboard itself is radiused at 12 inches, so this one fits perfectly. This one is not quite fitting, but it's pretty good. And I'll just position this one so that it's over both parts of the fretboard, and this one here, and I'll find a little block for the center. Like that. And then it doesn't really matter too much if we bruise the wood on the back, but I'll put a clamp. I'll put the template underneath because I don't really mind if that gets slightly bruised. So then we've just got to use the clamps. So I'm not going to tighten this up too much just for now. It's not going to be moving around because of our indexing pins. But I want to tighten these up in order, in some sort of order. I'm not sure whether it makes too much difference, but it's possible that if you tighten them at one end and then at the other end, then you might put some strain on the wood and cause it to maybe buckle slightly. Not sure if that's really the case, but it might be better to avoid doing that if necessary. So I'll just check that everything's, looks as if it's lining up correctly. Yeah, everything looks okay. So I'm not putting too much pressure on just yet. Just get most of the clamps in place and then tighten them up one by one. Okay, so just make sure that this one's obviously come loose. Just make sure everything's nice and tight. Okay, looks good. And we'll now leave that for a few hours to set up before I take the clamps off. The fretboard is now glued onto the neck, and it's a good joint. So I'll now cut off the excess with the bandsaw and then use a router to trim off the excess so that it's the same size as the neck.